Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ken. The news just doesn't stop. It's always breaking news after breaking news. But right now, the PMO officer is having an interview with Vashi on CTV, basically highlighting why the deficit of the $78 billion is not obtainable. It's not the right move for Canada at this time, that we are broke and we are almost finished because of it. So let's take a look.
Welcome back to Question Period. Headed into tomorrow's high-stakes confidence vote in the House, MPs will be armed with new information. Parliament's fiscal watchdog has dug into the Prime Minister's first budget, and two major findings stand out. First, the PMO says it is unlikely that the government's stated fiscal anchor or declining deficit to GDP ratio will be respected. Second, the PMO maintains its view that the government's definition of capital investments is overly expansive. Jason Jakes is the interim parliamentary budget officer. Hi, Mr. Jakes. Good to welcome you back. Thank you very much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
I wanted to start off on the second point. What is it that you see as overly expansive, and how impactful is it that it is?
From our perspective, we think that the definition the government's used around capital investments is overly expansive. And in particular, they've thrown some things in there, some categories of spending, which other jurisdictions in other countries would not typically include. Most notably, the inspiration, of course, for this framework comes from the United Kingdom. And in the case of the UK, it's a far narrower definition. And of course, the biggest risk with all of this is if you're not spending on productive capital investments, if you have an overly broad definition, then you're not going to get the investment impact and the growth in the economy that the government expects.
What about fiscal anchors? That's what we spoke about the last time you were here. You were really tracking this very closely. They've obviously changed from what they promised to be the fiscal anchor, debt to GDP, and the platform to deficit to GDP. What do you see there?
Certainly, in the case of the deficit to GDP, it should come as no surprise that I agree with not the new government, but the previous government that indicated that the debt to GDP ratio is the most important medium-term indicator of fiscal sustainability and essential for securing Canada's AAA credit rating. The government has cut that anchor. So that is no longer part of the suite of fiscal anchors the government is using. And it's certainly not our place to judge which fiscal anchors the government uses. At the same time, the way in which the government went about this was certainly not transparent. So we've had this fiscal anchor for over 30 years. Other jurisdictions look at the debt to GDP anchor and a declining level of debt to GDP as being the mainstay of fiscal anchors. It's something that the Liberal Party of Canada campaigned on in 2025 in April. It was in their platform. And without any discussion whatsoever, this fiscal anchor was eliminated.
And what about if you did apply that calculation? Like, where do you see debt to GDP? Because you had identified that in the lead up to the budget as, you know, one of the primary things informing your position at the time, which was very controversial, that things were unsustainable fiscally, that we were looking over a fiscal cliff. So where is debt to GDP going, and why do you conclude in this that things are still sustainable?
So in the case of debt to GDP, over the medium term and over the longer term, debt to GDP is effectively going to be flat. So we no longer have a declining debt to GDP ratio. Based upon our calculations, there's very limited margin for error based upon the government's fiscal agenda at this point. And of course, looking back, it's important to remember that this is very different than what we've seen over the past 30 years.
So why are you saying now that it's sustainable, but a few months ago that was not? Like, were you mistaken before, or is the calculation on something?
In terms of, so previously, these numbers are very similar to the numbers we saw previously. The definition of sustainability is your debt to GDP ratio is stable or declining over time. And that's not my definition. That's the government's definition. That's the definition from the International Monetary Fund. So based upon the widely accepted international definition, that was the case before. That continues to be the case now.
So you still think the fiscal situation here is unsustainable?
I think the current fiscal situation, we moved into new territory. So based upon the previous government's fiscal anchors, it was a situation where the government, if they were targeting a stable or declining debt to GDP ratio, then there was very limited margin for error or room for maneuver. Now we're in a situation where the government makes no pretense about having a stable or declining debt to GDP ratio. We're in a new territory where it appears as if the government is making the argument that in comparison to other countries, we have room to spend. So because our debt levels are lower than some other countries, we can go out, we can borrow the money, and we can spend the money the next time that there's an economic shock and if we need to. And that,
do you think that's true? Pardon the interruption.
Oh,
do
sure.
you think that's true? They say the IMF agrees. Do you think?
Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying like he prefers the Trudeau Liberal government way of looking at spending compared to the current Carney government of spending. So he's raising the alarm that the last government actually had, like, you know, they may have been artificial to a degree, but they had walls in place saying, don't go over this or we're going to be in deep trouble. The Carney government doesn't care. They're calling it investing. It's flat out debt. And the people who are going to be paying that is you, the one who's watching, and your kids. It's debt. It's not investment. Investment is something that accumulates interest over time. It takes years to do that. The government's not investing. They're creating this crater of debt, and you're the one who's be eating it at the end of it.
It's true.
If I think hopefully the government can go out and borrow additional money at this point. It's not a question of borrowing the money. It's a question of what the money is fundamentally going to be spent on. And as somebody who's responsible for fiscal transparency, I do need to point out that nobody has had this discussion. So during the 2025 election campaign, all major political parties identified a declining debt to GDP ratio as being the most important fiscal anchor. We're now in a situation on September 18th, in response to a question in QP, the Prime Minister himself said one of the three fiscal anchors for this government was a declining debt to GDP ratio. Don't believe me? Look it up in Hansard. All of a sudden in the budget, that anchor that we've had for 30 years, the most important fiscal anchor, is gone without any discussion whatsoever. And now we're in new territory where potentially we're going to be borrowing substantially more money the next time that there's an economic shock. And it's not for me to judge that. It is for me to point out that nobody has had a meaningful discussion around that.
Before I let you go, I mentioned how there was quite a bit of reaction among the government ranks to your initial analysis. They posted your job on a permanent basis, and they used in the job posting the candidate has to show, quote, tact and discretion and communicate in a neutral way. Do you think that's aimed at you?
I hope it is. I've worked on the Hill for 17 years. I've dealt with thousands of parliamentarians. I've also been responsible for the electoral platform costing exercise in the 2019, 2021, and most recent elections. And so I have a lot of experience, probably more experience than most people around town do, in dealing with parliamentarians across political parties who come from different cultural backgrounds, different linguistic backgrounds, and tactfully and discreetly working with political parties around the platform promises that they want to make, even in situations where they don't necessarily like the numbers that we're giving back to them. And I absolutely think it's an essential part of the character, the individual that should occupy the permanent post of PBO.
And forgive me if this is too personal, you don't have to answer. Will you apply to be the permanent one?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, from my own perspective, having worked in the office since the beginning, I think it's important that parliamentarians have the choice. So they will have the choice that they've seen what I plan on doing and how I plan on managing the office. They have the choice for this approach, the current approach, or they have a choice for a new approach. And if the Prime Minister decides he wants to go in a different direction along with members of Parliament, I certainly respect that. And I certainly plan to be with the office regardless of the outcome to support whoever is in that role.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Mr. Jakes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you see what happened, though? His position was a part-time or like a temporary position, if you will. And now, ever since he actually came out saying that this new budget, this $78 billion deficit is unattainable, all of a sudden now there's a new posting for a new permanent position. I find it very interesting because the Liberals did not like him coming out to CTV and other places saying that this is not the right direction we need to go. We cannot afford this. This is unsustainable. This is not the right way. So I believe that they want to hire somebody who is tactful or like able to keep their mouth shut and be more of a gray man and just listen to orders in the background and not come forward and be the actual alarm bell. This position, you have to remember, is supposed to be neutral. Not supposed to be more left, more right. It's supposed to be dead center, what's best for Canada, based on the numbers specifically. They are accountants. They are excellent at what they do. Nobody else can compare. But it's very interesting that they're posting a full-time position all of a sudden after he came out with this budget. So it's very telling, in my opinion, that they don't want somebody who has a good head on their shoulders and call them out on their stuff. But are we going to go to winter election? I don't know. I really do predict that the Conservatives obviously are going to vote against the budget. The Liberals are not. Obviously, they're very pro. And then you have the Quebecois. They're not getting anything out of the deal, so they're going to vote against as well. But the NDP is the one that's very, I don't want to say neutral, but they're not in a position to go to an election. They're basically bankrupt, right? There's the Jen Bing-Sen left them high and dry. He only cared about his $2 million pension, and then he took off after he retired, let's call it. Kicked out is appropriate term. But yeah, so if they decide to show up or not show up, they may have a couple of people who are sick, and that way they don't really vote. They might vote neutral, and that might still push the Liberal Party forward at the same time. So we might end up just them accepting this budget, but then at the end of the day, when things start going south, they can't point the finger at the opposition anymore. They have to say, hey, no, you guys are holding the bag on this one. You made this budget. It's been accepted. You're going to roll with it. You're the one who hasn't done any pipelines. You haven't done anything for Canada. You haven't took off the emissions cap. You haven't, got free trade, or let's call it, between all the different provinces. Everything that you went against Orange Man bad, you have done nothing to get a deal with Trump. So they're going to be holding that above their heads like crazy. So this could be very interesting to watch. But what do you think? Comment down below if we're going to go that way or not. We're going to find out today. It's going to be the CPAC. It's going to be going live around 6:30. And check out that YouTube channel, and we'll get to find out what the heck is going on in Canada. Can't wait to see you guys on the next one. It's going to be a lot of fun.